At some point, his view is maybe a tariff is better than a deal.
Michigan's governor has directly raised the alarm with President Donald Trump after the damage his tariffs will do to the auto sector in America's car capital.
In Michigan, the heart of America's auto industry, the pressure is building. Over the summer, President Donald Trump's latest tariff measures have landed with force, and the numbers tell a sobering story. General Motors reported its second quarter profits fell by $1 billion, attributing much of the decline to new import taxes. Stellantis said it lost $2.7 billion in the first half of 2025, also pointing to tariffs as a major factor. Ford's latest results are expected soon, but analysts already anticipate the same pattern. Trump has pitched these tariffs as a way to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Yet in Detroit and across Michigan, the early impact is hard to miss. Rising costs, squeezed margins, and a growing unease that these measures may be hitting home harder than they are hitting foreign competitors.
The new import taxes rolled out in the last several months could lead to more factory floor job losses, price hikes, and lower profits.
The problem starts with the basics of production. Since June 2025, imported steel and aluminum, critical for vehicle frames, chassis, and countless components, have carried a 50% tariff. Canada, the largest aluminum supplier to the United States, is now facing a 35% rate on non-USMCA goods as of August 1st. Mexico, though given a 90-day delay on new tariffs, still faces the threat of 50% duties on certain metals and auto parts if talks fail. Outside North America, India's rate has been raised to 50%, affecting some automotive parts and materials that U.S. manufacturers rely on. Even items far from the assembly line, leather, textiles, and interior trim imported from Asia, are caught in the net. The complexity of modern supply chains means that a car labeled "Made in America" can still depend on dozens of foreign-sourced elements. Many U.S.-based suppliers themselves import critical subcomponents, now taxed heavily before they ever reach a Michigan factory floor.
So far, auto companies have been eating the impacts of the tariffs, and that's what we're seeing in the latest profit reports. It's only a matter of time until the companies pass those costs off onto the customer.
At first, the Big Three absorbed these new costs, hoping to protect sales. But, according to the Center for Automotive Research, the 25% tariffs on autos and parts alone could add $108 billion to industry costs in 2025. That figure doesn't even account for the knock-on effects from 50% steel and aluminum duties, or the layered tariffs from multiple trading partners. The Alliance for Automotive Innovation warns that these costs will inevitably reach consumers. Higher sticker prices could push entry-level models off the market entirely, reducing choice and slowing the rollout of new technologies. Electric vehicle makers face an extra hurdle. The U.S. still lacks a large-scale domestic battery manufacturer, forcing reliance on imports that now carry steep tariffs. In Detroit, cutting production means more than fewer cars on the lot. It means fewer jobs, especially in communities that have spent decades rebuilding after past downturns. Analysts say the next 3 years could bring sustained declines in sales and employment if current policies stay in place. Trump sees tariffs as leverage to pressure trading partners into investing in the U.S. and opening their markets. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, however, has stayed firm, keeping most Canadian exports tariff-free under USMCA and seeking new trade routes abroad. He maintains that the steep duties on Canadian metals and parts ultimately raise costs for U.S. consumers and manufacturers more than for Canada. It's a test of two strategies: Trump's high-pressure push for quick concessions versus Carney's long-term approach built on stability and alliances. For America's auto sector, the outcome will shape whether these policies deliver stronger domestic production or deepen the cost and job losses already taking hold in Michigan and beyond.
Canada's new government will do several things. First, we will take a series of measures to stabilize our domestic steel market and prevent harmful trade diversion arising from current trade tensions.
When President Trump raised tariffs to 50% on Canadian steel in early June, the blow was immediate. Within days, exports collapsed, jobs were cut, and one of Canada's most tightly integrated cross-border industries found itself severed from its biggest customer. This week, Prime Minister Mark Carney finally responded, not with threats or retaliation, but with something more calculated, a structural shift, one designed not just to react, but to rebuild.
The trade actions of the United States are further transforming global steel market dynamics and supply chain. Let's be clear. Canada will be one of the countries most impacted by these developments.
The plan starts with a clear message. Canada will no longer be the world's most open steel market. For decades, nearly 2/3 of Canada's steel consumption has come from imports, while over 90% of its steel exports flowed south to the United States. Now, that equation is being rewritten. By the end of this month, Canada will implement strict tariff rate quotas. For countries without a free trade agreement, imports will be capped at 50% of their 2024 volumes. Anything above that will face a 50% tariff. For FTA partners, the cap is 100%, with the same 50% penalty beyond the threshold. A second, more targeted measure aims directly at Chinese origin steel. Any product containing steel melted and poured in China, regardless of where it's finished, will face additional tariffs. With one exception, U.S. steel remains untouched under existing CUSMA terms. This isn't retaliation, it's insulation.
So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian steel for Canadian projects.
Rather than escalate tensions, Carney is using this moment to reorient the domestic market. That means investing, not just protecting. The federal government will inject $1 billion through the Strategic Innovation Fund. This money is earmarked for Canadian steel producers to modernize equipment, produce higher-value products, and fill the gaps left by lost U.S. contracts. To support workers directly, $70 million will be funneled through labor market development agreements, covering training and income assistance for up to 10,000 steel employees. An additional $150 million in regional support will be prioritized for steel-producing communities, alongside expanded loan access for mid-sized firms, lowering entry requirements, cutting interest rates, and extending loan terms from 5 to 7 years. But perhaps the most transformative change is in federal procurement. Going forward, government contractors will be required to use Canadian steel in major infrastructure, housing, and defense projects. From shipyards to bridges, the steel that builds Canada will now come from within. All of this unfolds in the shadow of Trump's tariff threats. Canada's position is precarious. A 35% blanket tariff on all Canadian goods is scheduled to begin August 1st, unless a bilateral deal is reached first. And yet, Ottawa has not retaliated. Instead, it's holding the door open, keeping tariffs off U.S. steel for now, while maintaining strategic leverage elsewhere. Digital services taxes have been paused. Canada has engaged in fentanyl coordination. Every move is part of a broader strategy to stay at the table, without appearing weak. Though the Prime Minister has acknowledged that no country has secured a deal with the U.S. free of tariffs under this administration, his approach suggests a pivot. The focus now is not on removing tariffs entirely, but shaping where and how they apply. The likely target is a reduced selective rate, 8% to 10% instead of 35%, with carve-outs for essential sectors like autos, energy, and metals.
Say we will continue to do business with the U.S. That's of the year, but we will also work with new partners or partners that we have not developed commercial relationship as deep as the U.S. one, including, of course, with Europe and key Asian countries.
Canada isn't just responding to a crisis. It's laying the foundation for a more self-reliant economy, one where steel is not just exported, but embedded in national development. This shift won't bring back every job. It won't reverse every lost shipment. But it offers breathing room and a pathway forward. Whether or not a deal is reached by August 1st, Canada has already begun to decouple its industrial future from Trump's unpredictability and place it firmly in Canadian hands.
Now, the Prime Minister has already stated that Canada won't accept a, quote, bad deal, even though concessions and border measures taken so far up. and Canadian counter tariffs are still on the table.
But I would look to see something Arctic specific in the budget. We might want to look at some of our first major projects being done in the Arctic.
While the world watches Washington's flurry of trade deals, something quieter, but potentially more lasting, is happening in Canada. As Trump courts new partners in Asia, Canada is turning to the Arctic, building economic resilience and forging powerful alliances with Indigenous communities. It's not just a policy shift, it's a strategic reset. Let's take a closer look at how Trump sidelined Canada and how Canada is pushing back. Since returning to office, President Trump has pursued a transactional approach to global trade. In July alone, his administration has announced new deals or frameworks with Japan, the Philippines, Indonesia, and the United Kingdom. These agreements are fast, headline-friendly, and focused on slashing tariffs, sometimes down to 10 or 15%. But Canada isn't part of that club. Despite being America's largest export market and closest neighbor, Canada has been left out. Trump's logic? Canada already has a deal, CUSMA, formerly known as USMCA. According to U.S. officials, that agreement includes carve-outs, so Canada shouldn't expect further concessions. In fact, the opposite is happening. On March 4th, Trump imposed 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods, and by June, steel and aluminum tariffs were raised to 50%. Now, he's threatening a sweeping 35% tariff by August 1st, unless Canada agrees to more U.S. market access. Washington calls it a reciprocal tariff, but to many in Ottawa, it feels like targeted punishment.
And what a great place. It has economic development potential, but there's defense importance, strategic defense, Arctic bases, other dual-use potential projects to roll out, and it sounds like willing partners potentially all around.
While Canada has responded with counter tariffs, reindustrialization, and a quiet consumer boycott of American goods, its most strategic move may be the one few are talking about. Canada is opening a new front, the Arctic. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada has launched a sweeping northern strategy, centered on Indigenous partnership, sovereignty, and strategic infrastructure. In July, Parliament passed Bill C-5 to fast-track development in Inuit regions. What makes this unique isn't just the scale of the investment, it's who's leading it. Canada has appointed an Arctic ambassador from the Inuit community. It has opened new consulates in Anchorage and Greenland, and pledged over $6 billion Canadian dollars for radar systems, transport corridors, and northern energy projects. These initiatives are being developed with direct leadership from Inuit organizations, building both trust and long-term capacity. But this isn't just a domestic agenda, it's a strategic signal to Washington. By investing heavily in the Arctic, Canada is positioning itself as the democratic anchor in a region where Russia is militarizing and China is actively expanding influence. At the same time, it's quietly challenging America's assumption of uncontested dominance in North American defense. And this goes far beyond geopolitics. The Arctic holds vast reserves of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, the raw materials essential for electric vehicles, advanced electronics, and modern weapon systems. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, as of 2024, the United States still sourced over 90% of its rare earth imports from China. Canada's new approach, working directly with Inuit communities under constitutionally protected agreements, means control over these resources won't be dictated by external pressure. Any future U.S. access to Arctic supply chains will require trust, cooperation, and respect for Indigenous governance. If Trump believed tariffs were the only leverage, he may have miscalculated. While the White House focuses on short-term wins, Canada is securing long-term power in territory, in resources, and in its relationships. And if Washington doesn't recalibrate, it risks being locked out of both Arctic diplomacy and the mineral supply chains it desperately needs. Trump may have assumed Canada had no other options, that it would wait in line for a new deal. But Canada is writing its own script. While some countries are chasing U.S. approval, Canada is building internal strength, defending its industries, rebalancing trade, and forming deep alliances with its own people.